Let's cultivate our motivation. So the last few days, the word expectations has come up quite a bit. And as we begin to study our life and our mind, we begin to see that we have a whole lot of expectations and assumptions and ideas about the way things are, the way things should be, the way things will be, and that we're constantly getting tripped up because we solidify our ideas and then reality doesn't go along with them. So we get unhappy, we get upset, and we often blame other people or the situation. But if we really examine closely, we'll see that the basic problem is our wrong conceptions, all these expectations and assumptions that we often don't even realize we have. So the more we can identify these expectations and then really ask ourselves, is this fair to expect this? Is this realistic? And often we'll see no, and then release that expectation, and then that saves us a lot of pain later on. So it's natural to have plans, it's natural to have some expectations, but when we solidify them and think they're going to happen, they've got to happen, it will be this way, that's when we really get into trouble with reality. So it's coming back to a point that we talked about the other day of being flexible. Flexible with what we're thinking and expecting. Flexible knowing that everything's conditioned and that we don't know all the causes and conditions and we can't control all the causes and conditions. And so in some way relaxing our mind and learning to accept things the way they are, and at the same time see that this is the nature of samsara and want to be free of samsara. So it kind of comes back to not expecting a lot out of samsara. So this is our plight. This is the plight of all the other sentient beings. How we all get so tangled up, disappointed, disillusioned, hurt, betrayed. But we're so fortunate to have met the Buddhist teachings that show us the way to untangle our mind and to really make our lives meaningful, not only for ourselves, but for all others, by practicing the path to Buddhahood. So let's let that be our motivation for being here this evening. So is there anybody here who has never had their expectations shattered? Yeah. Who's never had everything go smoothly? No. Who has had everything go smoothly in their life? So that whatever you assumed, whatever you thought was going to happen, actually happened that way. Anybody? Yeah. I bet if we sat and talked, we'd have some amazing stories to tell each other of just our life experience, and how we've gotten knocked around in samsara, especially by all these expectations. And when you're in the middle of it, you feel like this has never happened like this to anybody else. My suffering, nobody else has ever experienced this. My trust has been betrayed, my plans shattered, my expectations out the window. Nobody else has ever experienced this kind of pain. It's the way we feel when we're in the middle of it, isn't it? Yeah. And yet here we are sitting in a room full of people who have all had that happen. Yeah, it's quite amazing, isn't it? Yeah, we've all had that happen. Before we got the land here for the Abbey, I was planning on establishing a monastery with a Theravada monk and with some Chinese monastics. And the Chinese monastics had a temple in Missouri, of all places. So the Theravada monk and I went back there, and we're going to start a place with the 3 traditions, and we all got along, and it was great. And I thought, this is going to be really terrific. This is what I'm going to put all my energy into, making this happen. And then, all sorts of problems started coming up. And even the things we had agreed on, then people changed their minds on. There were many things that I had just assumed, that I hadn't really bothered to check with anybody. I just thought my ideas were correct assumptions, and they weren't. And essentially what happened was my life fell apart. Yeah? And I'm sitting there in the middle of Missouri. Yeah. Missouri. I'm a West Coast girl, Missouri. Yeah. Anybody know the politics of Missouri? Don't get arrested in Missouri. Yeah, Illinois and Texas, you don't want to have anything to do with the prison system. That's because I work with inmates in these places, so I know about that. But, everything just totally fell apart. And I'm sitting there going, this wasn't supposed to happen. We were going to make a monastery with all 3 traditions. And we all had such good intentions, and it was going to happen. And then, crash, bang, boom. Yeah, and I wound up not having a place to live again, and, trying to pick things up again, and feeling a whole lot of embarrassment because I had told many people that we were doing this, and now it fell apart. Some of you knew me during this time, yeah. So, it was a very good experience in the end, In the middle, it was really painful. But in the end, I realized how much I learned from it. Yeah, and how I really needed to let go of my assumptions and expectations, even the ones that I checked with people and they agreed to, you know. So I developed this little slogan that's called "Sentient beings do what sentient beings do." Yeah. So sentient beings are unpredictable. Or if you want to predict them, you predict confusion. You don't predict things going well and making sense and following through and people keeping their promises and all of that. You just realize that people change their minds, that other situations come up in the external world. They can't do what they had anticipated doing, and you're left standing there. Yeah. And so at one point I called my friend Alex Burson. He and I are quite old Dharma friends. And we're on the phone and I'm going, I wasn't crying. I know better than to do that in front of him. But I was complaining. And he said, "This is samsara. What are you expecting?" Boing. It's like, yeah, what in the world am I expecting out of samsara? You know? I'm expecting not to have pain. I'm expecting not to have broken relationships. I'm expecting people to follow through. I'm expecting myself not to get angry, you know, and that, you know, so much of the source of my pain was my own wrong expectations. So it was actually very good for me, you know, because it taught me to kind of step back and really think about things, not have so many assumptions, and really have a much more flexible mind. Because, like he told me, you know, this is the nature of samsara. What am I expecting? Yeah, I'm expecting a pure land in samsara. If that isn't dumb, So, yeah, I've had a few more of those times. I could tell you a lot of stories, yeah, of people disappointing me and things falling apart. And I must say, I could tell you so many stories all night. But I must say, you know, having gone through those various experiences, how painful they were when I was going through them, but how really, how much I grew because of them. Yeah, really how much I grew. So now looking back, feeling quite grateful for that. Another thing I'm grateful for is being born at a time when the Buddha has given the teachings and having access to the Buddha's teachings, because the Buddha, you know, really understands our mind and was able to teach a method to stop the pain and essentially to stop creating the causes for the pain. Because once the pain is there, you know, the karma is ripening. But to stop creating the causes so that there's nothing to ripen. So I'm very grateful to the Buddha for that. So that leads us up to, we're in chapter 8 of approaching the Buddhist path. And it's on a systematic approach. So this is how the Buddha taught the Dharma, this, you know, the systematic approach of how to follow the path. And so it's on page 178 for the people who are following. So this section is called the 4 Truths and the 3 Levels of Practitioners. So describing the four truths from the perspective of the three levels of practitioners helps us understand the motivation, aim, and practice of each level. Was it yesterday or today I talked about like the Four Noble Truths according to a theistic viewpoint? Yeah. And how His Holiness said, all the religions have that kind of thing. So here His Holiness is doing it in terms of the three levels of practitioner, the initial, the middle, and the advanced. So for an initial level person who aspires for a good rebirth and happiness in cyclic existence, true dukkha refers to coarse suffering, especially the misery involved in unfortunate rebirths. The true origins of this dukkha are the 10 non-virtues and the coarse afflictions that motivate them, such as covetousness, malice, and wrong views. True cessation is the temporary freedom from an unfortunate rebirth, and the true path to attain that is abandoning the 10 non-virtues and engaging in the 10 virtues. Okay, so that's in short, the initial level practitioner. For a person of middle capacity who aspires for liberation, true dukkha is the 5 aggregates of a samsaric being that are taken under the influence of afflictions and karma. Okay, true origins are the afflictive obscurations that cause rebirth in cyclic existence. True cessation is the freedom from all such rebirth, or more precisely, the ultimate nature of the mind that has abandoned all afflictive obscurations by applying the true paths. The true paths are Arias' realizations held by the wisdom that directly realizes emptiness. Okay, so for the middle level being, this is kind of the common way of presenting the four truths that are in accord with all the different Buddhist traditions. Yeah. Then for the person of advanced practice capacity, so this is a person inclined towards the Mahayana. Okay, so someone who aspires for full awakening. True dukkha is one's own lack of omniscience and the dukkha of all sentient beings. Boy, that's different, isn't it? Yeah. True origins are the cognitive obscurations and the self-centered attitude. That's different too. True cessation is the cessation of cognitive obscurations at Buddhahood, or more exactly, the ultimate nature of the mind that has abandoned all cognitive obscurations by applying the true path. Okay, so the true cessations is actually the emptiness of a mind that is free from, in this case, all the afflictive and cognitive obscurations. Yeah, true cessations is an emptiness. Okay, true paths are Arias' realizations held by the wisdom directly realizing emptiness and bodhicitta. Okay, so you can see for the 3 capacities of beings, how you talk about, our present situation, its causes, the alternative, and the path to that alternative. It's different according to the capacity of the different practitioner. And so hopefully, as we start out with the initial level being, then we gradually build up understanding, we build up inner strength, we become the middle level practitioner, the advanced level practitioner. Okay, now the next section is called More Than One Approach. Okay, so all of us who like one simple way of doing things, it makes us, we want one right approach. Just tell me the one right thing to do. Okay, and this section says there's more than one. Okay, so, there's another assumption down the drain. Our ultimate goal is to attain Buddhahood and become the 3 jewels ourselves. Okay, so this is a big point that's different between Buddhism and theistic religions. In theistic religions, you can never become God. Yeah, you can please God, you can approach God, but that's it, okay? In Buddhism, we have the potential to become the Buddha. Yeah. And this is really something quite spectacular when you think of it. Yeah. To be able to bridge the gap and become a fully awakened being. You know, that we have that potential, and that there's guides who teach us how to do that. The Dharma Jewel consists of the last two of the four truths, true paths and true cessations. Okay, so that's the Dharma we actually take refuge in. Yeah, the realizations, the true paths and true cessations. We don't take refuge in the books. Yeah, the books teach us the true paths and true cessations. And also, at the beginning, we take refuge in the Dharma Jewel, the true paths and true cessations, in the mind streams of others. But the ultimate Dharma Jewel is the true paths and true cessations in our own mental continuum. Why? Because that is what is really going to protect us from samsara. Okay, is our own realizations. Our mind becomes the Dharma Jewel when we gain true paths and actualize true cessation. At this time, we become the Sangha Jewel. Okay, so first we become the Dharma Jewel, then we become, or at simultaneous with become the Dharma Jewel, we become the Sangha Jewel. And when motivated by bodhicitta, we fully actualize all true cessations. We become the Buddha Jewel. Thus, to understand the meaning of refuge in the three jewels, we need a deeper understanding of the Dharma Jewel, and this is based on understanding the four truths. Okay. Full understanding of the subtle aspects of true cessations depends on understanding the two truths, veiled and ultimate. Okay. Or some people say conventional and ultimate truths, especially the ultimate truth, the emptiness of inherent existence. So here again, I love the way His Holiness sets things up. He just shows how different things are related. You know, the true refuge is the Dharma Jewel. You become the Sangha Jewel, you know. So if we want, and then we become the Buddha Jewel. So to do that, then we really need to understand the meaning of refuge in the three jewels. We really need to understand the Dharma Jewel. If we want to understand the Dharma Jewel, we have to understand true cessations. If we want to understand true cessations, we have to understand emptiness. Yeah. And so everything comes back to understanding emptiness. You'll remember way at the beginning of the book, His Holiness went through this proof that Nagarjuna gives in the Karikas, where he proves the existence of the three jewels based on the existence of emptiness, based on phenomena being empty. Yeah, as this is a stupendous argument, but it's like everything comes back to, you know, what's the real nature of phenomena and understanding that. While Atisha's Lamp of the Path presents one sequence of steps to become the three jewels, the Prajnaparamita Sutras present another. Maitreya's Ornament of Clear Realizations, a treatise on the Prajnaparamita Sutras, presents this sequence by means of 8 clear realizations. 8 clear realizations that are characterized by 70 topics. Okay. So the first clear realization, the exalted knower of all aspects, or omniscience, has 10 principal characteristics that define a Buddha's mind. Don't you love the list? There's so many numbers. Yeah. And if we could only remember all the numbers and all the lists of things that are within each of those numbered categories. Okay, so the first clear realization, the exalted knower of all aspects, has 10 principal characteristics that define a Buddha's mind. Bodhicitta, instructions, and so forth. Okay, I won't read all of them, but they're in the note. The topic of instructions begins with the two truths, which encompass all phenomena, followed by the four truths, which are the objects of practice. After this, taking refuge in the three jewels is discussed, followed by non-clinging, tireless effort, and so forth. Okay, so the first clear realization, talking about the omniscient mind, it has 10, principal characteristics. So first, it teaches bodhicitta. Yeah, why? To make sure that it awakens our Mahayana disposition, our interest in full awakening, our attraction to great compassion, to bodhicitta. So we want to have that, learn that at the beginning, so that becomes really deeply embedded in our mind. Even though we don't have that altruistic intention of bodhicitta now, it becomes deeply embedded. So it's kind of floating around in your mind all the time, and it's going to influence all the practices you do, even if you're starting at the very beginning of the path. Yeah. Kind of like, you know what it's like? When you're growing up, if you have the idea, I'm going to go to college, then even you're in kindergarten, you're nowhere near college, but it's in your mind, I'm going to go to college. And so your experience in kindergarten is really different because you have that thought, rather than if you just think, oh, I'm not even going to graduate high school. Then in kindergarten, your whole experience will be different because you don't even see your potential to finish high school, which is actually the tragedy of a lot of students in this country, and why things don't work out well for them. The topic of instructions begins with the two truths. So, okay, you get bodhicitta, a little bit love and compassion, yeah? Then, what do we get hit with? The two truths. Yeah, is that an easy topic? No. Okay, it's a difficult topic. Okay, because you're talking about all phenomena. That's followed by the four truths. Is that an easy topic? Looks easy when you first list them, but when you get into them, that's not easy either. Okay. And then, because the last two of the four truths are the Dharma refuge, then there's the topic of taking refuge. So remember, I was saying last week that in this book, we move the section on refuge, that in the Lamrim it usually comes after talking about impermanence and death and the potential to have an unfortunate rebirth, but how we moved it to just after talking about the four truths, because the last two of the four truths are the Dharma jewel that we take refuge in. Yeah. And I think it really makes much more sense for those of us in the West to talk about taking refuge at that point, rather than earlier on the path, where we don't, we hear about the Buddha's qualities and we're going, huh? But after you've studied more, then you hear about the Buddha's qualities and it's like, okay, maybe that's possible, And then when you can relate the Dharma refuge to what you just studied about the four truths, which are encompassed in the two truths, then, things begin to fall in place. Okay. And so, those of you who have gone to teachings that His Holiness has given in the West, you'll notice that very often, if it's a few days of teachings, a series of teachings, he'll start off with something general that's very easy and talk about being a kind person. And that lasts for about a half an hour. And then he hits you with the two truths and the nature of the mind and emptiness and, all this kind of stuff. And, and he's teaching many times, these big audiences of people who have never heard anything from the Dharma. They don't know anything. And they're sitting there, because it's His Holiness, and they're listening, and they're going, I don't understand anything, but this is fantastic. Yeah, and His Holiness, He doesn't pull any punches. He just socks it to you right at the beginning. Yeah, because he knows he's speaking to an educated audience who also happens to be dumb. We're educated, but we're dumb in terms of the Dharma. Yeah, but he trusts people to really think about what he says. And so he just starts with this stuff. He doesn't, hold your hand and say Dick and Jane, saw the cat. He starts with calculus. And, and you take it from there. Okay, so the audience for Atisha's Lamp of the Path is different. He wrote this text at the behest of Prince Janshub, who requested a teaching that was suitable for Tibetans. Oh yeah, no wonder. Okay, thank you. I'm just checking. Yeah, glad you're following. Okay, Haribhadra wrote Clear Elucidations, the most widely used commentary on the Ornament of Clear Realizations. In it, he speaks of two kinds of practitioners, those of sharp faculties who are very intelligent and deeply analyze the meaning of the teachings, and those of more modest faculties who will follow due to faith in the Buddha and the scriptures. The principal audience for Haribhadra's commentary is sharp faculty practitioners, and the above sequence is especially useful for them. So if his audience were more modest faculty practitioners who relied on faith rather than reasoning and analysis, then the text would have started in a much different way. Yeah, it would have started much more easily and talking about the Buddha's qualities and something that kind of inspires you and makes your mind soar as you believe in something that's kind of, like this, but you don't really understand why. Okay? So, practitioners of faith, they're inspired like this. But if you ask them, please explain this topic and why you think it's important, they run into trouble there. Okay? So Haribhadra's talking to the sharp faculty disciples. Yeah. So that's why when you start studying the ornament, you may have done well in college, but you start the ornament and then you're going, oh, what is going on? Because it's a whole different way of teaching. And the topic is, not something you're already familiar with. Okay, now, Atisha's audience for the Lamp of the Path is different. He wrote this text at the behest of the Prince Janshub, who requested a teaching that was suitable for Tibetans, the vast majority of whom were Buddhists. Okay, so this is important, because the audience for the Lamp of the Path, the audience for the Lam Rim, is people who are already Buddhists. The audience for Haribhadra's commentary on Maitreya's text is our faculty disciples. So the texts are directed at very different audiences. Okay. So he wanted instructions, John Chuba wanted instructions that the Tibetans could easily put into practice that would enable Buddhism to flourish once again in Tibet. In response, Atisha outlined the sequence of the 3 levels of practitioners. Okay, so that text was designed for a specific purpose and a specific audience. Just like this series, the Library of Wisdom and Compassion, is designed for a specific audience, and how the topics are explained, why the order in some cases are different, why there's, a volume and a half of merely of introductory material. Yeah. So His Holiness says, when I give general instructions on the Buddha Dharma to educated people who are new to Buddhism, I prefer to use the sequence in the Ornament of Clear Realizations to present the overall structure of the Buddhist path. Okay, starting with the compassionate bodhicitta motivation and moving on to the instructions. This helps them to understand how various points fit into the framework. Okay, so he's saying, why he's teaching this way to educated Western audiences who don't know anything about the Dharma, okay, but who he's assuming will think about what he teaches. So this helps them to understand how various points fit into the framework. While I can't go into depth on these points with beginners, everyone appreciates the notion of compassion, so I speak of that first. Then I briefly introduce the 2 truths so that people will be aware that the way things appear and the way they actually exist differ. That's one of the most difficult things to understand in the Dharma. And that's what he teaches to, 3,000 people in the theater in New York. Okay. From there, I go on to the 4 truths of the Arias, which establishes the framework for the path to liberation. In this context, turning to the 3 jewels for refuge and guidance makes sense. Okay. For this reason, in this series, taking refuge in the 3 jewels will be presented in conjunction with the 4 truths, rather than in the context of the initial level practitioner, as in the Lamrim presentation. Okay, so the whole section on taking refuge is in volume 4, which comes out in October or November. Yeah. And it goes into refuge in a much deeper way than in the Lamrim. Yeah. The Lamrim way, the Lamrim presentation of refuge is really quite general. Here we really went into depth and we talked about the 8 characteristics of the, each of the 3 jewels from the Sublime Continuum, and, all sorts of other material is in there. So it's quite rich. Mm-hmm. Okay. I encourage those of you who have completed philosophical studies and appreciate the sequence of instruction in the Prajnaparamita Suttas and the Ornament of Clear Realizations to integrate that sequence into your Lamrim teachings. So he's in some way talking to some of the Geshis here too. Yeah. This will benefit your students. I also suggest you teach the tenet systems. Lamrim is more practical, while tenets are more academic. If your students study both, they will develop a clear sense of purpose for Dharma practice and a deeper understanding of emptiness. Okay, so he's saying that we have to teach and study on multiple levels. What is practical, and also what is philosophical. Okay, we need both of those studies. A teacher will vary his or her approach depending on the audience. We talked about this in the community last week. When Nagarjuna taught Precious Garland, his audience was a king, a person who was interested in the Dharma, but who also had worldly responsibilities. To him, he first presented the method to secure fortunate rebirths, followed by the method to attain liberation. So the king's a practical guy. He's really busy. Yeah, his phone's ringing all the time, and he has WhatsApp and what is it? What's the other one? WeChat, and what's the one they use in Taiwan? Line. Yeah, so the king's a busy guy. He has all that going on, okay? But the essential thing he has to learn first is how to create the cause for a good future life. Because if you don't have a good future life, the rest of your Dharma practice isn't going to happen for a long time, okay? So to him, he first taught the fortunate rebirths, followed by the method to attain liberation. On the other hand, when Nagarjuna taught commentary on Bodhicitta, which explains a verse from the Gita Tantra, the audience was of advanced capacity, specifically practitioners of highest yoga tantra, and this approach suited them. So the commentary on Bodhicitta, it's a comparatively short text, not so long, but you start out and, there's this beautiful, verse of taking refuge and generating bodhicitta from the Gita Tantra. And then that brings in emptiness, and then he hits you with all this stuff on emptiness. And then at the end, he comes back to kind of a little bit more bodhicitta and upper rebirth and stuff like that. Okay. But it's interesting, in Precious Garland, he started out with how to gain a fortunate rebirth. Then he went to the highest good, taught about emptiness. Then the second chapter, he went back and forth. He went back to the fortunate rebirth, then the highest good, then the fortunate rebirth. Then he, got into the qualities of the Buddha and so on. And so all this time, he's talking to the king, who's a busy guy, who's a lay person, and he has all his wives to take care of and, all his kids to take care of. And then at the end of the fourth chapter, he says to the king, it's like, I've spelled this all out for you, and it's difficult to do as a householder. So think about it. You can practice as a householder, but you can also think about becoming a monastic, because that's a good way to practice too. Yeah, and then the last chapter, he starts out with those 57 things to abandon. Remember, where he hits you with like every fall, bang, 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 and then when you're thoroughly convinced you're a jerk, then he starts talking about the 10 bodhisattva grounds and the qualities of the Buddha. And yes, you can attain those. So he, the way he teaches is quite amazing to lead the mind that way. Okay. So when instructing a large group, spiritual mentors give teachings designed for the public. Here they usually follow a particular text and give a broad presentation of the path to address the needs of many people in general. Okay? When teaching a small group or an individual, spiritual mentors give instructions according to the needs of those specific individuals. It is important not to confuse these two situations and think that because our spiritual mentor gave one instruction to a specific individual, that everyone should follow it. Okay? Remember this. Yeah. Because there's the famous thing that you hear quoted throughout, Dharma organizations. Lama said, or Rinpoche said, and then somebody repeats the information, the guidance that the teacher told them, and they present it as the guidance that everybody in the center or monastery should practice. Okay? But what a teacher tells one practitioner to do isn't necessarily what they would tell the second practitioner to do, because people are really different and they think differently. They're at different stages in their practice. They need to do different things. Yeah. So a skillful teacher, on a one-to-one basis, will refine the teachings that they give. Yeah. So if you, it happens so often. People hear one instruction in one context and then present that, tell all their Dharma friends, and this is what everybody is now supposed to practice. Okay. I think I told you about the time when I was living at Vajrayogini at Dorji Pomo in France, and Lama Yeshe said to one guy who was the gardener, he said, I want flowers all around. Yeah, it'd be beautiful to have flowers all around. So this man, very devoted to Lama, I'm gonna fulfill Lama's wish. Lama wants flowers all around. So he goes to the director of the center and he says, Lama wants flowers everywhere. So I need a budget of some enormous amount. So I can buy all the garden tools, I can buy all the seeds, and we're going to have flowers everywhere because that was Lama's instruction, what Lama wants. The director threw a fit because the center didn't have that kind of money to spend on flowers. Yeah? And so then there ensued a whole big going on because Lama said, and, to him as an individual, in a very general, relaxed way, that his mind then made super concrete. Yeah, super concrete. We've got to have flowers everywhere for next time Lama comes. Otherwise, I failed as a disciple to fulfill my guru's instructions. Yeah, that's how he was thinking. And the director of the center is going, hey, it's like we don't have the money to do that. And we've got to be practical. And so it was a big problem. So that's one example. This kind of thing happens all the time. Yeah. And so you really have to think, before you say something. And I find very often what people do is they assume that their Dharma friends won't listen to them. So they always present something as the teacher said, do da-da-da-da-da, because then it has some authority. But, did the real teacher really say it like that? Did it really mean like that? That's a whole other thing. But we don't have confidence in our own voice. We don't trust our fellow Dharma students to have good communication. And we think the only way we can do it is if we we can't invoke God, otherwise, so we invoke the teacher. That's not suitable practice. That's not good. Okay? We have to learn to communicate with each other as equals without citing, but the teacher wants da-da-da. And of course, the teacher wants, to 10,000 things. And you pick out the two that you also want. And you leave out the other 9,998, Okay, so we have to learn to discuss and work with each other. Okay. and not always have the same, well, Lama said, Rinpoche said, it's, okay. Organizations cannot function like that, And I find it very strange because Westerners want a more democratic organization, but then what do? Yeah, they assume, well, nobody's going to listen to me, so I have to invoke the authority. So, you're not acting in accordance with what you really want. And the Buddha set the Sangha up, so that, people have a voice. Not everybody has an equal vote. Yeah, the fully ordained people make the final decisions. But everybody has a voice. Everybody can add their 2 cents. Okay, and then we decide based on consensus, as much as possible. And if we don't share the consensus, then we have to ask ourselves, if everybody else is going along with something and we're the only one, kind of holding out, they made a decision to what, I don't know. Yeah. Oh, they made a decision for the Buddha Hall to only have 2 floors and no single bedrooms. And I was really counting on a single bedroom. And I'm really against changing the plan for the Buddha Hall. We need to have it 3 floors so that there's single rooms on the bottom and I get a single bedroom. But the rest of the Sangha, plus the architect, are in harmony, and agree that really it's much more practical and better for the building being 2 floors and that we construct another building that's separate, that is just residences, So then it's like everybody's in consensus, but you're hanging on to, no, I want it 3 floors. Yeah. So then you have to ask yourself, is it being 2 floors without the single bedrooms that I so desperately want? Is that a huge mistake that's going to bring damage to the Sangha? If it's a huge mistake that's going to bring damage to the Sangha, then you use your veto power and you don't go along with the consensus. Yeah? But if it's something where it's just your preference, and you're attached to your idea, even though you think your idea may be better, for the sake of harmony, you throw out your idea and you go along with what the community wants. And you go along wholeheartedly. Yeah. You don't say, yes, I agree, and then later on come and say, actually, we should have made it 3 floors. I told you so. Yeah. If you agree, you wholeheartedly agree, and you give your support to what the community's decided. Yeah. And then you cry in your double room. What? Oh. Mm. What suffering? Yeah. It's if you don't like a double room, we can arrange a double tent. Yeah? Yeah, there's a dorm. Yeah, then you're not stuck with one roommate. You don't like one roommate? Good, move into the dorm. You have many. Okay, so where were we here? Yes. The order of presenting topics may differ as well. Mm-hmm. The Ornament of Clear Realizations briefly mentions the wisdom realizing emptiness and then proceeds to bodhicitta. The commentary on bodhicitta presents emptiness first, followed by the cultivation of bodhicitta and the bodhisattva practice. Okay, so completely the reversed order. This is the approach for intelligent disciples. Although bodhicitta comes later in the Lamrim sequence, Shantideva teaches it at the beginning of engaging in the bodhisattva deeds, so that all subsequent meditations and practices will be directed towards awakening. So to plant that motivation in our mind at the very beginning, so that it carries through the entire book that Shantideva is writing. No matter which order we learn bodhicitta and emptiness, it is helpful to cultivate an understanding of both, even as we emphasize the practices of the initial and middle levels in our personal practice. In this way, our meditation on precious human life, death and impermanence, and so forth will be supported by some degree of bodhicitta and the wisdom understanding emptiness. In addition, our meditations on the topics of the initial and middle levels will increase our appreciation of and urgency to cultivate bodhicitta and practice the 6 perfections. Okay. Have you noticed in here, His Holiness does not say you start out with tantric initiation. Yeah. He does not say you walk into a Dharma center. Yeah. And, and they're doing an initiation, and somebody comes up and tells you, this is a precious opportunity with a high lama, you've got to take it. And so you follow their advice, and you sit there, and you have no idea what's going on. And then at the end, they tell you you have a daily practice you have to do, and that you just took very sophisticated precepts that you have to keep, or else you're going to hell. Okay? His Holiness did not say that in here. Yeah? And yet, unfortunately, this is what happens to a lot of people nowadays. Yeah? And it's quite sad, because then people get really, really confused. Yeah? So I think very good. Go slowly, build the foundation of your house, then build the walls, then build the roof. Don't rush into things you don't understand, even if somebody is telling you, but this is a fantastic opportunity, it may never happen again, and this is a very high lama. Yeah, because I've seen so many people get very, very confused. Yeah. And Dharma centers need to be more careful about this. Okay, in my humble opinion. Dharma centers, they need to take a role in guiding people and protecting people and keeping this kind of thing from happening, where people jump in over their heads and then get confused and then get really upset. Yeah. Okay, that's my soapbox for today. Okay. Then the next heading is Teachings for a Contemporary Audience. Atisha composed The Lamp of the Path with the needs of 11th century Tibetans in mind. Yeah, are we 11th century Tibetans? Okay, he did not go into detailed philosophical debates or extensive reasonings when writing that text, because his audience already believed in the Buddha's teachings. So he didn't need to explain all the reasoning that proves rebirth. Yeah, he didn't need to explain why there are other realms of existence. He didn't need to explain Mount Meru and the 4 continents, and are they real or not. Okay, he was teaching an audience of people who were already Buddhists. Okay. This audience simply required a concise, straightforward teaching explaining how to practice from the beginning of the path up to awakening. That's what they needed. Something straightforward, concise, boom, boom, boom. With Buddhism now spread internationally, the audience is very different. These people need to hear the rational arguments proving rebirth, liberation, the existence of the three jewels, and karma and its effects that are found in the treatises of the Indian sages. Without a clear understanding of these topics, their comprehension of the path to awakening will not be complete. So that's why, jumping in with Tantra, when you haven't had all this preparatory material, you don't know the Buddhist worldview, that's why that doesn't work. Okay? I read some Lamrim notes written by the Galu master Satan Shaptram, who lived 1910 to 1985. He commented that when we contemplate a Lamrim topic, we should integrate points from the major treatises on the perfection of wisdom and the middle way into our reflection. In this way, our study of the great philosophical treatises and our Lamrim practice will complement each other. This is the method used by the Kadam Jungpawa, the Kadam Great Text tradition, headed by Geshe Potowa. Okay, so there are three different Kadam traditions. This is the one that Geshe Potowa, he was kind of the lineage person for that one. Okay, so in that tradition, it's really putting the Lamrim and the philosophical treatises together so that you're learning a general approach from Lamrim, and you're learning the reasonings from the classical texts. Yeah, because we're not an audience that believes in Buddhism. Yeah, and we have questions and we want answers and we need to understand things. Yeah, so it's important that we study those texts. So in putting this series together, His Holiness really emphasized that I needed to put inside material from the great philosophical treatises. Okay. An understanding of the principal subjects studied in the great monastic universities, the perfection of wisdom, middle way, reasoning and epistemology, Abhidharma and Vinaya, is most helpful to facilitate our practice of Lamrim. When Tibetans first began teaching Westerners, very few philosophical texts were translated into Western languages. Nowadays, more translations and study guides are available, making the study of these classical texts possible. Okay, so it's true, there's many more translations and study guides and everything. However, one of the difficulties is that the language in these texts is very difficult to understand. Even for Tibetans, an average Tibetan cannot sit down and, take out Haribhadra and read it and understand much. Yeah, because classical Tibetan, colloquial Tibetan are very, very different. Classical Tibetans, your paragraphs are your sentences are this long. Yeah? And all sorts of incredible words, and the outline starts on this topic, and then it goes way out here and into there, 5 branches of there, and then all of a sudden it comes back here. And you're going, where are we? Okay? So it's a very different way of studying. And so it's difficult to take out one of the classical texts and just read it. Yeah. So what this series is trying to do is to act as a bridge between the Lamrim texts, most of which, not all, but most of which are comparatively short, and the topics are explained in quite an abbreviated way without too much philosophy, to make a bridge between that and the great treatises that are very difficult to understand unless, you really have that kind of mind that likes to delve into a philosophical text. Yeah. So this series is trying to bridge that gap and present something with some, introduce some of the philosophical topics in in a language that is easy for us to understand. So I sometimes felt like I was translating from English into English. Yeah, it's like you translate from philosophical English translations, of the great texts into something concise in a simpler language that people can understand. And then from there, then people can go to, the philosophical texts, and they'll have a basis and they can understand those better. Okay. But you're really seeing His Holiness as emphasizing the importance of understanding the Buddhist worldview, and getting that foundation. Some people may have heard that since Lamrim encompasses all the teachings of the Buddha, it is sufficient to rely on it alone. This is true in the sense that the Lamrim summarizes the meanings of the great treatises so that someone who has spent years studying them can easily identify the important points for meditation. Those who have not studied these important texts will benefit from learning something about them. Okay? Modest faculty disciples rely more on faith, seeing the Buddha as a perfect spiritual master and lineage teachers from Nagarjuna up to their own teacher as reliable spiritual mentors. These people are not as interested in in-depth study, whereas those of sharp faculties are curious and want to learn more. They question the meaning of the teachings they hear and read. They want to know why a particular sage explained the Dharma the way he did. Buddhism encourages us to investigate and explore. People who are curious with a genuine wish to investigate the Dharma are real followers of the Buddha. For these students, Lamrim alone is not sufficient. They must rely on the great treatises. Okay? So you can also see that there's teachers who have different teaching styles and different topics that they like to teach. And some teachers teach very much based on faith. The 3 jewels are fantastic. The guru is an enlightened being, everything like this. So you just need to have faith and believe in these teachers and in what the Buddha said, and you're good to go. So some teachers like to teach like that, and then other teachers, they like to teach the philosophy. And some teachers, of course, teach a little bit of each, okay? So there's disciples with different dispositions and mentalities. There's teachers who adapt what they teach to teach, different groups, or who prefer, somehow their style attracts one type of person rather than another type of person. So I think one of the beauties in Buddhism is we need all these different approaches. Because even though His Holiness clearly favors being a sharp faculty disciple, not all of us are sharp faculty disciples, And then you have some people who really want to do social service. So you have all sorts of groups of people coming to the Dharma. So we need many different teachers. We need many different styles of teaching. We need many different Dharma centers. We can't just say that there's one approach and everybody should follow that, because we're very different sentient beings, and that just doesn't work. So, sometimes, we ourselves, believe it or not, can get a bit closed-minded, It's like our teacher teaches one way, and, this is the right approach, You don't use enough reasoning. You have too much blind faith. You need to study this difficult stuff some more. And then somebody else says, you don't have any faith. All you do is use all these reasonings that are just, fictional stuff. You need to have faith and believe. And, they're both right. except the advice is meant for different people. Okay, so we have to kind of accept that and rejoice that there's a diversity. Not only in Buddhism, but that there's a diversity of different religions, so that people can find a religion that's suitable for them. Yeah, some people, if you teach them that there's God, they really thrive. Other people, if you say, this God stuff is a bunch of hogwash, you totally shatter their faith, and they get very upset, and their spirituality is destroyed. That's not skillful means. Yeah, that's not helping anybody. So, we need to do according to different people's dispositions and levels, and recognize that there's a lot of variety, and not be stubborn and insist everybody does things our way. As tempting as that is, because our way is best after all, isn't it? Because we would never follow anything that wasn't the best way. Right? Okay. If we lack proper understanding of the exact meaning of emptiness, true cessations, nirvana, and awakening, what is the basis of our devotion? Yeah, this is an excellent question. If we understand how it is possible to eliminate ignorance and afflictions completely, our conviction in the Buddha and reliance on his teachings will be firm. Without learning and contemplating the Buddha's teachings, it is difficult to clearly distinguish the Buddhist path from paths espoused by other teachers, and as a result, our faith in the three jewels will not be firm. We see people who change beliefs from one day to the next. Good example, okay? Also, this is an example of what I talked about at the beginning of the session, yeah? So when I first came to Seattle to teach, there was one woman who was very supportive of the group, completely into the Dharma. She and I became very good friends as well. And, always very helpful, very supportive, loved the Dharma, went to the Kala Chakra initiation. And so one year I went to Dharamsala for about a month to hear teachings. I came back, and she's become a Catholic. And she's moving to the UK to be a postulant at the Sisters of Clarice, the Sisters of Saint Clare. Yeah, I don't know what they're called, but anyway, I was gone 1 month. 1 month, and I said, "What happened?" And she said, "Well, I went on vacation to, New Mexico or Arizona, and there was a Clarice monastery there, and I just happened to think of, how wonderful, what the life of the cloistered nuns are, and, how they have so much faith in God, and I thought, I have to try that out." And she did, and she's still a sister of St. Clare in UK. I should go see if I can visit her when I go to UK. Yeah, I haven't seen her in almost 20 years. Yeah. Okay, we see people who change beliefs from one day to the next. Although they may attribute their changeability to open-mindedness, It seems to me that it is due more to confusion. If they learn and contemplate the Buddhist teachings, especially the philosophical treatises that describe emptiness and dependent arising, this confusion will give way to clarity. The Lamrim teaches us how to go for refuge in the Three Jewels by understanding their unique qualities that are not possessed by other spiritual guides. When we have such an understanding, we naturally take refuge in the Three Jewels. No one needs to encourage us to do so, and no one can discourage us from taking refuge in them. Yeah. And I think the same happens, in our relationships with our teachers, that we shouldn't need to be taught to respect our teachers, I mean, if we're really rude, uncouth people, a little bit of manners is helpful. But, through learning the Dharma, then naturally respect and appreciation for our teachers come. Yeah. So it always kind of puzzles me how at the beginning of the Lamrim it talks so much about the relationship with the teacher in that way and developing respect and faith in them. Yeah. Because actually, and I've heard Lama used to say that, and His Holiness, I think, says that too, that if you really learn the teachings well and have confidence in the teachings, then that faith automatically comes. Yeah, you don't need to force yourself to have it. Yeah. And I know for myself, I'm definitely not one of these faith-based people. I remember in the early years, just everybody had tremendous faith. Yeah, so much faith. Look at Lama, they're Buddhists, they're fantastic. Everything they say is true. It's wonderful. And I'm sitting there going, why in the 9-point death meditation is the third point and the first thing the way it is? It doesn't make sense to be there. I'm asking questions like this. And, and everybody else has so much faith. And I'm going, oh, I'm such a crummy student. I don't sit there and like, wow, that's just not me. And so I really thought for a long time something was terribly wrong with the way I practiced. I just didn't have enough faith. But I couldn't make myself have faith. I mean, how do you make yourself have faith? I should have faith, I should have faith, I should have faith. That doesn't do anything. It's like saying, I should have compassion, I should have compassion. It doesn't make you have compassion. Okay? So, so I just thought, okay, I do what I can, but, these other people are much better disciples than me. And then, years later, you look around and a lot of those people are gone and I'm still hanging around. So it really taught me, don't compare myself to other people. Yeah, it doesn't make sense to compare yourself because we're all very different. We all have different strong points and different weak points. But I like what he says here. When you have such an understanding, we naturally take refuge in the Three Jewels. Nobody needs to encourage us to do so, and no one can discourage us from taking refuge in them. Yeah. So that kind of refuge comes from understanding, and that's going to be really firm refuge. We may hear about pith instructions and ear-whispered teachings that are transmitted orally from teacher to disciple. Do not think that these instructions are separate from Nagarjuna's texts and the other classical treatises. Whatever is in the ear-whispered teachings and the pith instructions is also in those texts. There are no secret teachings apart from what we study in the classical treatises. This is His Holiness saying this. If we don't know how to integrate the teachings in the great treatises into our practice, The fault is our own, and it is up to us to rectify it. Yeah. And, when he says things like that, it really makes me stop, because you see in the West, it's like you hear, oh, you're going to hear the pith instructions. Yeah, this is a special high teaching of the pith instructions. And you think that it's some high, ear whisper just from the teacher to the disciple. And now I'm sitting in the room with this teacher, and well, he's not whispering in my ear, but, to a room full of 300 people. But, it's kind of close. And I'm getting, this thing, and it's so special. And His Holiness is saying, if you really study the classical texts, you'll find those same instructions in there. Yeah? So don't start thinking about you're going to get some kind of magical shortcut teaching that nobody else has. He's saying, it's all in what the great sages have already taught here. Okay, so this is a good stopping point. There's time for questions, comments.
One of our Singaporean friends says, is the ornament of clear realizations only found in Tibetan Buddhism?
I think so. I don't think it was ever translated into the Chinese tradition. Maybe now it's starting to be translated, but in the Chinese list of the 5 texts of Maitreya, it's not one of them. Yeah. And the ornament is basically lists of things. You can't really read it and understand much. You have to have a commentary to it.
It's more a problem. So here he is saying that, I'm leaping to be a 21st century Buddhist, we need to study the great classical texts. Mm-hmm. However, as a Westerner, we don't have access to very many teachers who have studied these in depth over a long period of time. So I wonder if, what he's also saying about that, that we're studying Pramanavartika with Geshe Topge is like a miracle. Mm-hmm. And all of the obstacles that we experience just in getting that teaching. And there are several people now teaching that, Geshe Kelsang Wangmo and so forth. Mm-hmm. So they're there, but it's such a tiny little group of people who can get to those teachings. Mm-hmm. And this book is for a big, big audience. Mm-hmm. So the gap between knowing how to access those treatises, or like even the translation for ornament for the Mahayana Sutra that we were studying at the library, mm-hmm. It's pretty not very clear.
Yeah. His Holiness isn't saying, as a baby beginner, go directly to the philosophical texts. And he isn't saying, only study the philosophical texts. I think he realizes that, there are only a few translations. Some of the translations aren't very good, and that we need to rely, you do the best you can. And, some people learn Tibetan, but most Western Dharma students are not going to learn Tibetan, okay? But, don't expect yourself to become a Tibetan and study like the Tibetans do. I told you the story about Tarpa Chuling and what happened there. Yeah? So you don't want that. Yeah? You need to construct your practice in a way that works for you, with teachings that work for you at a level that you're capable of understanding, and nudge yourself a little bit more towards the difficult things. But, it's so easy to hear this about the classical texts and then think, okay, tomorrow I have to start studying Abbey Samaya Alankara. Where's the book and the translation? And then, even there's a translation, it's just a list of names and terms. And then you go, what am I supposed to do? Well, here, read Haribhadra. And you read Haribhadra and you're going, what in the world is he talking about? I've never heard these words before, things, what is it? They exist only by being designated independent, after having been perceived by a reliable, non-defective, reliable cognizer. That's the measure of things existing. And you go, huh? So that's not what His Holiness is saying to do. Yeah. So when you need to get the basic framework, what we need to do basically at the beginning is learn how to work with our mind. Yeah. And that's why he's encouraging a combination of the Lamrim with the philosophical stuff. If you just do the philosophical stuff, your ignorance, anger, and attachment don't get tamed, because you aren't at the level yet where you can take that material and apply it in your practice. You need something that is easier to understand, that you can practice right now, that helps you. Yeah. Because if you don't do that and you're just as angry as you were, you have just as much as attachment, you quarrel with people just as much, So that's why I think it's very good at the beginning, learn the thought training teachings, the mind training teachings. Yeah, because they will give you something right away that you can practice, and you see the results in your life. Yeah. And once your mind is a bit calmer, then it's easier to study this stuff that's more difficult. Yeah. When your mind is filled with attachment and jealousy and arrogance and stuff, how can you even concentrate enough on reading a philosophical text? You can't. Yeah, you read 3 sentences and you think, I need chocolate. Yeah. Yeah. And then you come back and you read another 3 sentences and you say, why are they talking like this? I can't understand it. Okay. So this is the whole thing about, being practical, accepting where we're at. This is a long-term journey. Nobody's saying we have to accomplish everything right away. Okay. Yeah. And so, yes, it is rare to have the philosophical text. But I think that for Westerners, for the Tibetans, it's very easy. You join a monastery, you have them. But for Westerners, very difficult. But Buddhism will not spread in the West if all you teach is the philosophical text to everybody right from the very beginning, because it's not suitable for them. Yeah. They need parts, this part, that part, the way His Holiness takes out, and explains, like, a little bit about emptiness, a little bit about the Four Truths, a little bit, about the nature of the mind and the logic behind rebirth, And so you start with that and understanding that, rather than, you don't pick up Laktung Chenmo and, start reading about the difference between the Svatantrikas and the Prasangikas. Like I said, the only thing I understood in that volume was pot. I'm not telling you which kind, but, it's difficult. You can't just sit down and read that. Okay? That's why there's things like this series. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Is it correct to say that a sharp faculty disciple would realize emptiness before taking refuge?
I think you could make an argument for that, but I don't think taking refuge is an on and off life switch. You either take refuge or you don't. I think as you gain a deeper understanding of emptiness, then together with that, your refuge increases. Yeah, neither of them are on and off things. Yeah, they're both understandings that develop gradually over time.
I also have to say that I bristle a little bit because I think modest faculty and sharp faculty are just too black and white for my understanding. Because there are certain things in the Dharma that I just have absolute curiosity and want to know and understand, and other things, my heart just responds to them. You know, I don't need a lot of explanation. So I get a little fussy when it's like this, you know, the sharp faculty do it this way, and they have all the great questions, and they really thoroughly analyze, and then all these kind of la romantic modest faculty students. I'm a little bit of both, you know. So
Yeah.
so there's a gray area, I think, between the two of them.
Exactly, yes.
Is Precious Garland kind of a bridge between these two? It seems like it's like quite a philosophical text,
Yeah,
but it's also so much more practical.
yeah, yeah. In some ways it is.
There's a lot of teachings.
Yeah,
on it.
it's included in Nagarjuna's texts on reasoning, but there's so much other stuff that is much more readily, understandable.
I'm looking at initial, middle, and great capacity, and it would almost sound like the Theravadan would be stopping at the middle level.
The
study, or-
the Theravada practice is mostly the initial level practitioner and the middle level practitioner. But having said that, it's not, you can't just follow the Lamrim doing that, because the Lamrim really abbreviates the middle level practice. And if you're going to attain arhatship, actually, you need to take the teachings on the perfection of meditative stability and the perfection of wisdom and bring them into the middle level practitioner.
I'm intrigued by his the Dalai Lama's comment that when we meditate on a Lamrim topic, we should integrate points of the major treatises of the perfection of wisdom and middle way into that reflection. I was wondering if you could give an example of how you do that.
Okay. Well, meditation and refuge. Then you bring in, if you've studied in Pramnavartika, why the Buddha is a reliable teacher. If you studied in Gyu Lama about the qualities of the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha jewels, then you would bring that into your checking meditation. Okay, so that would be one thing. Understanding karma, I think if you bring in studies just about dependent arising and familiarizing the mind with dependent arising on causal dependence, that this is very, very helpful. And then also, whatever Lamrim meditation you do, at the end, it's very helpful to do a short meditation on emptiness, that everything you've just meditated about is empty of inherent existence and exists dependently. So that would apply to any topic that you do.